Alright, so let's set the scene. Our main guy, Kion, is on a serious grind, pushing himself past every conceivable limit, both physically and mentally. Every single day, he's deep in some hardcore training, perfecting his combat techniques, and pushing his body through workouts that would make a drill sergeant weep. His existence had basically become a non-stop loop of aches, pains, and sheer willpower. Kion totally bailed on the typical 9-to-5 grind and waved goodbye to a normal social life. Also, he could dedicate every waking moment to leveling up. But you have to ask, what's the point? Why give all that up? What's he after? Only Kion has the answer, and he's getting ready for something that's bound to happen. You see, the end of the world was slowly but surely on its way. A wave of fear was washing over the city, but a lot of people were still skeptical. Plenty of folks just didn't buy it, figuring it was just another elaborate hoax or some silly prank. Unfortunately, that denial came with a heavy price. One after another, the doubters started vanishing. Kion, already fed up with society, just kept to himself, lost in his own world. You could almost hear him thinking, are these supposed monsters even real? His phone kept lighting up with breaking news alerts about the first monster sightings, but honestly, as long as it wasn't his problem, he couldn't be bothered. I mean, didn't humanity have enough problems already? But then, in a single moment on a random street, his skepticism was completely blown to pieces. Right in front of him lay something that was definitely not from around here. Kion just stopped dead in his tracks, completely stunned. This thing looked like it crawled right out of a horror movie, all twisted and squirming on the pavement. Any sane person would have taken off running. But for all its creepy vibes, it wasn't being aggressive. It was just lying there, looking weak, exhausted, and almost kinda sad. Kion paused for a second. He was looking at a monster, and playing hero was the last thing on his mind. But when he looked into its eyes, he saw this vulnerability, this deep yearning for a home and family it had probably lost forever. It was a tough call, but Kion eventually decided to help the creature out. It gave him a grateful look and then offered him a peculiar little item. It was something called a Silver Goblin Pill. He carefully took it, and bam! A bright notification suddenly popped up right in his field of view. The system was now online. Later, back at his place, Kion spent hours just gazing at the weird pill the monster had given him. As he held it, it dawned on him that this wasn't some minor choice. This one little pill could reroute his entire life. At the same time, the news channels were absolutely losing their minds. Giant towers were suddenly appearing all over the planet. Kion barely had a moment to take it all in before a massive explosion rocked the area. And wouldn't you know it, right then and there, one of those towers shot up into the sky just outside his window. It was like reality itself had just glitched out. This huge, menacing structure burst from the ground, making the whole world tremble. First monsters, now mysterious towers. Everything was screaming the same thing. The apocalypse was officially kicking off. Now, Kion was usually the kind of guy who overthinks everything. But maybe, just this once, it was time to do something a little impulsive. So, without a second thought, he popped the Silver Goblin Pill. Immediately, the system gifted him a Sage's status window, basically a user guide with the best odds for not dying. Then, right in front of him, this enormous book just materialized out of thin air, glowing with this otherworldly light. He snatched it up instantly. Just holding the book felt like he had the power to change reality itself. Then the system chimed in with a friendly reminder, the end of the world was here. And rule number 1 for survival, get good at fighting. So, it was right back to the grind for Kion. As a countdown hit 0, Kion felt a bizarre shift in his surroundings. Next thing he knew, he was standing in a forest, completely alone. This definitely wasn't the apocalypse he'd been picturing. And hey, look at that, a flaming sword lying right next to him. The moment his fingers brushed against it, the system announced that his training was officially underway. It analyzed his abilities and assigned him the class that was his perfect match. He was a combat swordsman. The system interface laid out all his stats perfectly. Name, level, health, mana, the whole shebang was right there in front of him. His very first quest from the system was simple. Either survive in the forest for 60 minutes or figure out how to escape. The guide also gave him a little tip. If he actually wanted to get stronger, he needed to take down as many monsters as he could. Trying to run away was not going to help him level up. And with that, the real test started. A surprisingly adorable creature appeared before Kion, a level 1, one-horned raccoon. But don't let the cuteness fool you. In a flash, that little critter went from 0 to 100 and lunged right at him, ready to attack. Acting purely on instinct, Kion took it down in a heartbeat with a single, perfect strike. The system gave him a heads up that his mana pool was only good for about 5 special moves. To make it out alive, he'd have to power up. Then, the monsters started coming in waves. But Kion was a machine, slicing through them one by one without slowing down. With each monster he defeated, his stats got a nice little boost. Every time he leveled, he earned points to upgrade his stats. But the second he dinged level 2, the system immediately knocked him right back down to level 1. A message explained that due to his sage status, his progression would be way slower than a regular person's. Kion was not thrilled about this news. Was he being penalized for the choice he made? A huge sense of this is so unfair washed over him, but when he pulled up the menu again, he saw that his actual stats had increased, even though his available points hadn't. And that's when the light bulb went off. That guide he got wasn't just some random insect, it was a straight-up system glitch, and lucky for him, it was on his side. This wasn't a penalty, this was an opportunity. If he played his cards right, the system itself could become his greatest weapon. All he had to do was keep grinding. Our hero went on an absolute tear, slicing through one creature after another without a break. Every single kill fed Kion more experience, pushing him through level after level. But then, just as he'd been hoping, the glitch did its thing. His level snapped back to 1, but every point he'd earned stayed put, giving him the perfect loophole for power leveling his stats. Kion's build focused on 4 core attributes. He had endurance, strength, perception, and agility. As a swordsman, you'd think the go-to choice would be to pump everything into strength and agility. More strength meant his attacks landed with more oomph, and higher agility let him dodge and weave like a pro. But his objective right now was different. He had to last for 60 minutes all alone in this forest. So, against all logic, Kion decided to pour his points into perception. He made short work of a one-horned raccoon. No problem. But that was chump change. It wasn't even a decent warm-up, much less a way to gain any real levels. With his perception stat maxed out, Kion started to see new avenues for hunting. It almost felt like our hero could literally feel the power levels of others, all thanks to that sensitivity boost. Out of nowhere, a new notification pinged on his screen. Hidden quest unlocked. Objective: hunt down the level 2 alpha raccoon. Kion was not prepared for this behemoth, which sported a long, sharp horn and equally nasty claws. It was way bigger than the cat-sized varmints he'd been farming. His high agility was the only thing that saved him, letting him leap out of the way just in time. The beast plowed into a tree like an angry rhino, leaving a gaping hole exactly where Kion was a second ago. He knew in an instant that this was a completely different class of enemy, but to Kion, that didn't change a thing. The creature launched itself into the air for one final attack, which would also be the last move it ever made. Kion ended the fight with a single, decisive slash, cutting the monster down instantly. With that, his last training mission was officially in the books. The first leg of his new life was over. The boy closed his eyes, granting himself just a tiny moment to breathe. But when he opened them again, the trees and grass had vanished. His entire world had been flipped upside down. Instead of a forest, he was surrounded by a mob of equally bewildered people, their faces a mirror of his own shock. That's when a voice crackled to life over a loudspeaker. The booming announcement informed the group that they had all officially passed their preliminary training. Apparently, they were now in the main lobby of some kind of tower. Kion did a quick head count. 14 guys, 11 women. Every single one of them looked like they'd just been through the ringer, same as him. The moment the announcer went silent, the room erupted into chaos. Their reality had been rewritten in a blink. For our hero, though, it wasn't a total surprise. He was already aware the apocalypse was on its way. A girl next to him nervously asked where they were. A voice from the back of the crowd yelled the answer. They were in the Tower of the Apocalypse. And then, popping into existence right in the center of the crowd, was a small rabbit. "Hello, everyone," it chirped. This was the manager of the first floor, a level 55 creature who had the audacity to call himself the tower's little cutie. His appearance immediately triggered a flood of questions. The crowd started to press in, absolutely desperate for some kind of explanation. But Kungum, the rabbit, was totally unbothered, acting as if he'd seen this exact same meltdown 1,000 times. Even Kion pushed his way forward, wanting to know if this was for real the end of the world, or if there was something they were meant to do. Surprisingly, the rabbit decided to answer him. He started with a sweet, innocent little smile, but then his entire face contorted. That adorable expression twisted into a horrifying, wide grin that sent a wave of pure dread through the crowd. The creature announced that the game was now beginning, a game where death was always on the table. Every single person on Earth was now a player trapped inside this tower. If they wanted to live, their only option was to band together and start climbing. Kion figured that if they could somehow make it to the very top, they might be able to go back home. But Kungum offered no such promises. To him, trying to find some deeper meaning in it all was a waste of time. The rules he laid out were brutally simple. The ones who climb might get to live. Anyone who stays behind on the bottom floor is guaranteed to die. Kungum then shared that a massive number of people had already been killed off during the tutorial stage. It was meant to be a simple survival guide, and yet so many had failed to even clear their first hurdle. Then, completely out of left field, Kungam asked if anyone there wanted to try and kill him. A stunned silence fell over the room. Kion's gut screamed that this had to be some kind of test. The rabbit might have looked harmless, but that level 55 tag told a very different tale. He was about to back away when the system gave him a direct order. Assist the first floor manager, which meant, bizarrely, that he had permission to go after the rabbit. The system hadn't led him astray yet, but this whole situation felt incredibly sketchy. As Kion was weighing his options, one guy confidently stepped out from the crowd. The man had a wild grin on his face, clearly giddy at the chance to put this weird rabbit in its place. He shot forward, aiming a punch right at Kungam, but the rabbit just casually batted him away with a ridiculously powerful slap. Then its body began to change, growing huge and menacing. This was its true form, a genuine monster finally showing its hand. Everyone was frozen stiff with terror as Kungam followed up with another devastating blow, killing the man instantly. The cute little bunny was now a hulking, muscle-bound executioner, and that's when reality finally crashed down on everyone. Pure chaos erupted as people scrambled in every direction. The seriousness of it all hit like a truck. Kion couldn't help but think that could have been his body on the floor if he'd been a little quicker to volunteer. But the mission clock was still ticking. Meanwhile, the little fluffball switched its innocent act back on, practically taunting them as it waited for the next victim. Kion started to get a bad feeling. Was the system glitching, or was this whole thing just a cleverly designed death trap? That tiny thing just stood there in a pool of gore, smiling, as if waiting for someone to choose between fighting it or just dying on the spot. Could the system actually be flawed? Or even worse, was it possible it had lied to him from the start? The thought was eating away at him when, suddenly, a new system alert cut through the noise in his head. The sage's status had fully booted up, and in an instant, everything clicked into place. This new skill gave him access to the guide, and more importantly, the power to see other players' status windows. But the timing felt awfully convenient. Why did the system decide to unlock the eye of the sage right at this moment? With a calm and confident air, he raised his hand. Immediately, every eye in the room locked onto him. He was the next tribute. It was a move so bold it screamed suicide, and everyone knew it. Even the little monster seemed shocked. This level 1 kid was actually stepping up to the plate, but Kion's hand was already resting on his sword. There wasn't a trace of fear in his eyes, only a look of absolute determination. A blonde girl shot forward, tears welling up, pleading with him not to go through with it. Others joined in, trying to hold him back, but Kion stood his ground. He wasn't being reckless, he had a plan. The rabbit, or beast, lunged right for him, probably expecting him to fold just like the last guy. But Kion's confidence wasn't just for show, it stemmed from a brilliant flash of insight. Earlier, Kungam had said there were 24 people in the room, but Kion had counted 25. As it turned out, Kungam hadn't miscounted. There really were only 24. The corpse lying on the floor was just a hologram Kungam had created. Kion figured it all out using his new eye of the sage. He'd scanned the so-called dead guy's status, and zip, nada, nothing showed up. All that primal fear, the terror of facing down a monster with such an insane level, it wasn't totally misplaced. Kion had seen it himself. Despite Kungam's ridiculously high level, every single one of his stats was a big fat 0. The rabbit was just as fake, a projection that would vanish the instant it took any damage. Our hero was way faster and stronger than Kungam, so dodging the incoming attack was a breeze. With one clean, decisive move, Kion landed the final blow. Kion turned around, expecting to find Kungam's body sprawled out on the ground. But what was left instead was a glowing orb. Inside, it floated a single stat point. The crowd went nuts, all demanding to know his secret. Kion had no intention of revealing his ace in the hole. He just casually pointed out that when the fake blood went flying toward Jane, she should have been drenched, but her clothes were perfectly clean. A big, burly dude stomped forward, accusing Kion of making a colossal blunder. Leo, a cocky level 4 player, just scoffed, insisting Kion's victory was nothing more than a lucky break. Kion pushed back, but Leo kept at it, mocking him and calling him a coward for being stuck at level 1 after all that had happened. The arrogant brute made it perfectly clear he was planning to snatch that stat point for himself, but Kion wasn't exactly the charitable type. Cold as ice, he claimed the point without a second thought, making it clear he wouldn't give it up to anyone. Leo absolutely lost his mind. Seething with rage, he swore he'd hunt Kion down until he was forced to rage quit the game. Just then, the loudspeakers crackled to life once more. There was an announcement about gold currency that could be used in the shop. Bonus gold was being given out for monsters killed during training. And then the announcer dropped a bomb. One player in their zone was sitting on a massive pile of 7,400 gold. Some players moaned that they hadn't hunted enough, while others were in awe of whoever pulled that off. But we all know the real story. The top player was Kion. He was the one who had raked in all of that gold. There were three main ways to use gold: buying items, upgrading skills, or boosting stats. Our hero decided to go with a smart play. He spread the points around, raising all of his stats to an even 20 and building a super solid foundation. Looking around, he noticed how many people were just blowing their gold on impulse, letting their gut overrule their brain. Realizing his tracksuit wasn't exactly standard-issue battle attire, Kion picked up some proper combat gear made for survival. Once he was done shopping, he ran right into that same blonde girl. She looked a bit hesitant as she approached him to ask for some advice. Jane, a level 3 healer, admitted she was blown away by his courage and confidence, especially since he was still a level 1. Since she was being so honest, Kion gave her a tip: pour her points into endurance, explaining that for her class, it was the single most important stat for staying alive. Jane trusted him completely, thanked him genuinely for the help, and promised she would do exactly as he suggested. The loudspeaker came on again to announce that a new task was starting soon. The rules were simple. Players had to form groups of 3. Anyone left over would be assigned to a team randomly. They had 30 minutes to get it sorted. Taking the cue, everyone started buddying up, picking teammates based on their class and level. Jane asked Kion if he'd be her partner, and he didn't have any problem with that. You'd think having a healer on the team would be a huge plus, but apparently not. Everyone gave me a wide berth because a level 1 swordsman just wasn't seen as a reliable teammate, and just like that, time was up. All the cool kids had formed their cliques, leaving me with just Jane as a partner right before the mission kicked off. I couldn't help but wonder if the teams were put together based on some cruel, cosmic joke, like pairing up people who would annoy each other the most. If my theory was right, it would perfectly explain how we ended up with Leo. I mean, how does a level 4 pro not have a team lined up? Was it possible that literally everyone had bailed on him? I thought about it for a second, but in this tower, pride is a luxury you just can't afford. My mind was already racing, trying to figure out how to spin this situation to our favor. The squad's first assignment was straightforward enough: take out a kobold pack within 12 hours. Leo immediately appointed himself team captain, telling the rest of us to just stay back and let him handle all the monsters by himself. I was about to pipe up with a brilliant idea called teamwork, but Leo cut me right off, insisting he was going to do everything anyway. So, I bit my tongue and decided to just watch how this disaster would unfold. In Leo's mind, a guy like me had no business trying to be brave. I'd just get myself killed in record time. Jane wasn't on the same page as Leo, though. She was genuinely worried about whether our little group would make it out alive. So there we were, 3 complete strangers thrown together. Could a team this dysfunctional actually clear the mission? All around us, fruit trees grew in thick groves. The air was thick with the buzzing of insects, just swarms of them everywhere. After a quick look around, it was pretty clear we'd been teleported somewhere deep in the mountains. Jane was visibly on edge, but I tried to calm her down. If this was still considered the beginner's floor, we probably had a fighting chance. And right on cue, something absolutely monstrous stepped into view. It had enormous claws, a body packed with dense muscle, and it just radiated sheer, raw power. A level 5 beast that looked like a wolf who'd been seriously hitting the gym. This was a whole different league from that raccoon we saw earlier. Jane and I held our breath, trying to come up with a strategy. Our first instinct was to scout the area and make sure it didn't have any friends nearby. But Leo, of course, didn't bother with patience. He just let out a roar and charged straight for the kobold like a complete maniac. He swung a massive punch right at its face, clearly expecting an easy victory. The rest of us were just frozen. Nobody anticipates that level of reckless, almost idiotic courage. A stun like that could easily cost Leo his life. The beast snarled back, flashing a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth, looking ready to rip him to shreds. But Leo didn't even flinch, just roaring back with the same untamed fury. I knew the guy was headstrong, but trying to solo a monster like this was just plain crazy. Jane sprang into action to back him up, casting her healing spells and buffing his stats. Fortunately, I couldn't sense any other monsters in the vicinity. That gave us a sliver of hope, at least. Even so, I could see Leo's attacks were barely leaving a dent, so I quickly pulled out my guidebook for some much-needed intel. It turns out, kobolds are naturally docile creatures. They won't attack first unless they feel threatened. In other words, Leo had basically walked up and kicked a hornet's nest, bringing this entire catastrophe down on our heads all by himself. I frantically thumbed through the guide, desperate for anything that could help. At last, my eyes landed on a crucial piece of information. The redhead was still giving it his all, finally activating his special skill, Stonefist. But instead of landing a final blow, his big move just managed to attract an even bigger problem, a level 6 kobold. This new arrival was faster, stronger, and now the two of them were ganging up on him, doubling the danger. Leo could barely stand, fighting on pure adrenaline, probably praying I would jump in. His eyes darted around for a moment, likely suspecting I had run for the hills. The relentless assault was wearing him down, pushing his body to its absolute limit. Jane tried to intervene, but she lacked any real fighting prowess. Her sword swing was more of a desperate prayer than an actual attack. The girl looked like she had accepted her fate, gripping her blade as if to say a final farewell. But in that very instant, the hero of the hour appeared from the shadows, driving his poison-coated blade deep into the monster. I channeled my sword mastery, forcing the potent venom to circulate rapidly through its system. The beast let out a blood-curdling howl as disgusting boils erupted all over its skin. The direct hit to its head from my blade seemed to be the most effective. Then, without any warning, it just detonated like a bomb. The level 6 kobold choked out one last breath and then collapsed in a lifeless heap. Leo was completely frozen in place, shocked that the tables had turned so suddenly. Jane, however, was absolutely ecstatic. I had just saved her skin. As it happened, the poison I'd used was extracted from the peculiar fruits growing on the trees we'd passed. It was a simple observation. While the bugs were swarming everything else, they wouldn't go anywhere near those fruits. And thanks to a little perk from my guide, I could summon these poison apples directly into my inventory. To put it simply, I'd had the solution to our first mission with me from the very beginning. I helped a grateful Jane to her feet as she thanked me for saving her. But Leo didn't seem too happy about my dramatic reappearance. As far as he was concerned, it looked like I'd been cowering in the bushes while they did all the dangerous work. The hothead started yelling that I had stolen his kill, insisting he was the one who did all the real fighting. He just couldn't stomach the idea that a level 1 rookie had succeeded where he had failed. The sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as our dysfunctional little group finally arrived at the kobold settlement. Going full beast mode, Leo just steamrolled his enemies with pure, unadulterated power, pretty much emptying his entire stamina bar in the never-ending brawl. His body was a mess of nasty cuts, since the monsters weren't exactly pulling their punches either. But even with all the pain and exhaustion, the thought of quitting didn't even register in his brain. Meanwhile, Jane and Kion were just calmly and efficiently taking out monsters like they were swatting flies. The redhead was in the middle of a desperate struggle for his life, and those two looked like they hadn't even started their morning workout. He was getting hit from all sides, and his attempts to block were getting sloppier by the second. Eventually, his legs just decided they'd had enough. He hit the dirt, completely spent and feeling pretty broken. It finally dawned on him that maybe, just maybe, he couldn't solo the entire mob, no matter how awesome he thought he was. Leo was just a trembling heap on the ground, his voice cracking as he squeaked out a plea for help. He squeezed his eyes shut, ready for the final blow he was sure was coming. But when he peeked open, he just saw a bunch of kobold heads popping like overripe blueberries. Kion was standing right over him, looking totally unfazed and offering a hand. Honestly, Leo had never been so happy to see this kid in his entire life. With the mission in the bag, it felt like that weird tension between Leo and Kion just kind of melted away. The three of them stepped back through the portal and into the lobby together. The tidal wave of emotions Leo was surfing a few minutes ago finally started to recede. He was annoyed with how things went down, but a promise was a promise, and he wasn't about to back out. You could see about a dozen different feelings flash across his face, which probably made him look super weird to everyone else. Turns out, their little group had wrapped up the mission faster than any other team. Kion chalked it up to some serious beginner's luck, but Jane was having none of that. From her perspective, Kion was the only one who could have possibly navigated them out of that disaster. He just smiled and took the compliment, even though he felt like a total fraud for the whole guide fib. Before long, the other teams started trickling back in. So, maybe they weren't the only ones who bent the rules and used the poison apples, but it was clear not everyone had such an easy time. A lot of people didn't make it. Another team came through the portal, with only 2 of its members left standing. Those kobolds were vicious, seriously powerful creatures. A voice then came over the loudspeaker, calling an official end to the mission. All 6 teams were back, but 8 of the original 24 fighters didn't survive the trip. They were gone for good. The mission was definitely a tough one, and some losses were expected, but seeing 8 people wiped out was a shock nobody was prepared for. You had to wonder just how many more people were going to get deleted before they made it to the final floor. It was time to hand out the rewards for clearing the first challenge. Any team that came back with all its members, plus the team that finished first, would get a prize of 1,000 gold. Our crew managed to hit both criteria, essentially doubling down on the bonus. Kion was all about stashing away as much as he could. For him, gold was his safety net, his ultimate insurance policy. Naturally, everyone was dying to know who actually snagged that first-place finish. This time, Kion couldn't really spin the story. River's team had finished second and had seen them leaving. But just as he was about to spill the beans, Leo stepped right up and announced with a ton of pride that it was their team. A wave of disbelief washed over the room. A squad made up of a healer, a total newbie with a low level, and a guy who charges in without thinking had somehow beaten everyone. Kion was really hoping the spotlight would just move on, but people wouldn't let it go, asking how a level 2 player could possibly be on the winning team. The whispers started up. Maybe the kid was just carried. Maybe that reward wasn't deserved at all. The blonde was about to jump in and start defending him, but Kion gave her a look to stop. It was pointless. Nobody was going to listen. Then River, a level 8 archer and one of the best in the region, cut through all the chatter. He announced that the only thing that mattered was that people survived. Liam, another level 8 player and one of the top swordsmen around, immediately agreed with him. That seemed to spark something. If they were ever going to get to the top, they'd need to stick together, for the sake of all the ones who didn't make it. The whole hall erupted in agreement until, suddenly, the flames lighting the room turned a deep, blood red. The noise died instantly. The loudspeaker crackled to life again with a warning. Because of the terrible survival rate in the region, a special penalty mission was about to be issued. It wasn't just going to be hard, it was going to be a death sentence. You could practically see the terror spreading across everyone's faces. The mission was simple. They had to pick one player to send on a suicide run. They had 5 minutes to decide. If they failed to choose, the system would just pick for them and sacrifice everybody. The reality hit them like a ton of bricks. In less than 5 minutes, they had to choose who was going to be the designated corpse. So much for that let's stick together speech. All those people who were just talking about unity now had to figure out who to throw to the wolves. The clock was ticking. Jane suggested that if everyone voted for themselves, maybe the system would glitch and no one would have to go. But nobody knew if that would actually work. What if that was a trick, and it just signed them all up for the deadly challenge? Those 5 minutes went by in a flash, and pure panic started to set in. They needed a name. And then, right on cue, one of the players pointed a shaky finger directly at our main character, the weakest guy in the room, the lowest level player of them all. Liam paused. This felt way too messed up. But really, what other choice did he have? Well, it was either him or someone else, and honestly, nobody was shocked. The way everyone was sizing Kion up, it was clear no one was volunteering to take one for the team. Jane pleaded with them to snap out of it, but Kion just gave her a look that said, let it go. It's not like her plan was a sure thing, anyway. Any trust in the room had already evaporated, so the vote was a landslide against Kion. At the end of the day, people were just trying to save their own necks, but Kion knew the real reason they picked him was painfully simple: his low level. In that one moment, you could see everyone's true character pop out: the ones who only looked out for themselves, and the ones who had a thing against weaker players. They'd completely forgotten the whole protect the helpless part of being a team. And for the grand finale, even Leo, the very guy Kion had saved, cast his vote against him. The portal for the suicide mission shimmered into existence. A lot of people still looked like they couldn't process what was happening. Jane was about the only one who genuinely felt terrible for the kid. Leo, on the other hand, figured he cleverly removed his main rival from the board. The sacrificial lamb had been chosen. Time to take the walk of shame, I suppose. Behind Kion, the crowd's expressions were a cocktail of guilt and better you than me, but Kion himself looked completely unfazed. The guide's instructions were to clear the mission. For him, this wasn't some terrifying ordeal. It was a golden opportunity for victory and some seriously epic rewards. The moment he disappeared into the portal, the lobby went dead silent. Jane and Leo were sitting quietly, lost in their own worlds, when a guy came over to offer his condolences. Sure, they hadn't known Kion for that long, but almost dying together is supposed to create some kind of bond, right? Leo, however, felt zero guilt. Not a single drop of regret. In his book, Kion got precisely what he had coming to him. He started spouting off about how a low-level player like that was just trying to ride his coattails to fame. Jane, sitting right there, looked absolutely floored. She knew the real deal was that Kion's skills were the only reason they were all still standing. But Leo kept ranting, blaming it on pure luck and the kid's knack for showing up at the last second. That's when the blonde finally snapped, sharply reminding him who times saved his skin. The memory hit Leo like a ton of bricks, making him wonder, could someone with those kinds of skills really be sandbagging his true level? River kept his gaze fixed on the spot where the portal vanished, quietly hoping Kion could somehow beat the odds. Jane, blinking back tears, whispered that she believed he could do it. And even if she was just trying to convince herself, River backed her up, refusing to let any doubt hang in the air. Meanwhile, our hero reappeared in the Cobalt settlement. Only this time, the atmosphere was a little off. It was gloomier, way emptier, and had a much more sinister vibe. Kion was almost ready to volunteer for the next mission himself, but then a whole welcoming party started to form in his honor. He was still fuming over Leo's betrayal and was itching for a way to blow off some steam. Then, right on cue, a system notification popped up. The Cobalts were back. Only this time, they weren't just hostile. They were absolutely livid. At the back of the pack, their leader showed up, a level 12 Kobold Chief who was built like a truck. The objective was simple: take every single one of them out. Leave no one standing. The chieftain, it turned out, was the official dungeon boss. So, Kion found himself standing alone against the whole angry mob and their roided-out leader, his sword coated with a little something extra. He braced himself as the monsters charged in relentless waves, giving him zero room to breathe. But Kion wasn't just quick, he was a whole lot stronger than they anticipated. Activating his basic sword mastery, he waded into the fray. Kobolds went down one after another, most not even seeing the hit coming, until only the chief remained, the final boss. And the fight was intense. It was just raw power versus raw power. Two brawlers, face to face, with no room to back down. And it turned out Kion wasn't the only one with some serious strength. The monster's high level came with some nasty tricks. The kobold was taking minimal damage, dodging with freaky agility. Then, to Kion's utter confusion, the chief suddenly turned and ran for it. A boss monster pulling a runner? That was just sad. Kion moved in for the final, clean strike to put this whole thing to bed. But in that split second, the kobold's skin hardened, turning into a natural coat of armor. Instead of a finishing move, Kion's blade just scraped the surface. Above them, a creepy red moon appeared, painting the entire area crimson. The creature's wolf-like eyes glowed scarlet, heralding a whole new level of trouble. With a wild roar, the monster spun around and threw a devastating blow. Is this the end for our hero, or will he find a way to pull through this dungeon mess? Back in the tower, Leo was launching his new PR campaign, declaring himself the chosen one who would lead them all to the top floor. To be honest, pretty much no one was buying what he was selling. Jane kept quietly hoping for Kion's return, while the redhead just sneered at the whole display. The blonde finally got fed up with his ego trip and tried to shut him down. Their argument snowballed into a shouting match that got everyone's attention. That's when Jane cut in with a sharp question. What are you going to say if Kion actually survives and walks back through that portal? But before Leo could stammer out an answer, the portal began to glow. And what do you know? Out walks the very guy they'd already written off for dead. There he was, our boy Kion, back with a gnarly gash ripped across his chest, but standing tall like a champ. Turns out, the Cobalt boss goes into overdrive when its eyes glow blood red. The monster almost turned Kion into people jerky, so he knew he had to dish out something way bigger in return. One single hit, that was the game changer. But he didn't have a second to spare thinking about it. The Grim Reaper was practically breathing down his collar. Each smack from that beast felt like getting hit by a freight train. Right in the middle of all that chaos, Kion had a light bulb moment. Forget death by 1,000 cuts, he was going all in on one perfect stab. He needed to channel every last bit of energy into one massive, show-stopping attack. Swords are for ending fights, not for giving little nicks. This was his one shot. That was his only play. He used the monster's own forward rush, throw his weight into it, and bet the whole farm on a single thrust. It was a real do-or-die moment. Him or the monster. And then his blade ripped right through, leaving a gaping, fatal hole clean through the kobold's chest. Holy smokes, he actually did it. The crazy plan worked, and for his troubles, Kion got a shiny new skill, Piercing Strike. Jane, completely tuning everyone else out, made a beeline for him with tears streaming down her face, all set to give him a huge hug. But then, out of left field, Leo's giant frame just bulldozed her right onto the floor. The impact sent her skidding across the ground. Sen just stood there, jaw on the floor. What in the world was Leo thinking, pulling a stunt like that? The big redhead started bellowing across the room, going on about how he always knew Kion had it in him, how he was destined to pull through. Yeah, right. The act was painfully obvious. His little speech was about as sincere as a $3 bill, and nobody knew that better than Kion. Naturally, Kion's comeback tour kicked off a tidal wave of questions from the crowd. Nobody could wrap their head around it. He'd taken down the boss but didn't even get a single level up? A few whispers of doubt started making the rounds. What if the whole mission was just a setup? Kinda like that fiasco with Cum. Maybe this guy wasn't a hero, just some con artist with an insane lucky streak. And just like that, Kion's suspicions were confirmed. It's an old story. People don't like it when the underdog suddenly learns to bite. Ever since he was a kid, he'd been the butt of everyone's jokes. No one ever thought the so-called worthless orphan could pull off anything by himself. While Kion just stood there, giving them the silent treatment, the other players were busy cooking up wild theories about how he'd managed to cheat death. He had to get a handle on the situation and steer the conversation somewhere else. Out of the blue, Kion seemed genuinely impressed by his resolve. Even Leo piped up to back him, though his reasons were a lot more about himself than about actually helping. Nobody really got what this whole performance was about, but then again, nobody was brave enough to argue with the mountain of a man. With two people in his corner, Kion felt himself relax, just a tiny bit. Still, his main goal was to make sure as many people as possible got out of this alive. To shut down the rumors, he figured it was time for a little show and tell. The moment he pulled out the sword he won as a prize, you could practically hear every jaw in the room hit the floor. It was a rare weapon that jacked up his attack power by a whopping 115%. Any sword wielder in the room would have sold their own grandmother for a prize like that. River, who never misses a thing, pointed out the poison Kion had slipped onto the apples, but Kion just waved it off, chalking it up to dumb luck. The archer jumped to his defense, pointing out that a reward this good was worth way more than a few lousy experience points for surviving. But Kion cut in to set them straight. This wasn't about some survival game. He was literally running for his life, and every single one of them had a hand in it. Hearing that, Liam finally caved under the pressure and admitted that Kion had a point. He dropped the excuses and came clean, admitting to everyone and himself that his vote was purely selfish. Picking the lowest level player wasn't a strategy, it was a cop-out. It was a death sentence, and deep down, they all knew it. Liam hung his head and genuinely apologized for tossing him to the wolves like that. He was honestly just glad Kion made it back in one piece. But not everyone was on the same page as Liam. Some girl in the crowd piped up, coldly pointing out that someone had to be the sacrifice, and hey, Kion even came back with some nice loot, so what's the problem? And just like that, the two of them started going at it. He was talking about guilt and having a conscience, and she just scoffed and told him to can the drama, reminding him that he was the first one to vote yes. That's when Sen stepped in and shut down the whole ridiculous argument. He wasn't trying to guilt-trip them, he just wanted to stop the pointless bickering. This whole death vote thing wasn't really about getting rid of the weakest player. It was just the tower's little game to turn them all against each other. The tower gets its kicks from planting seeds of distrust, stirring up drama, and watching everyone spiral into chaos. It loves nothing more than seeing them fail. Kion's return, though, was solid proof that they could actually push back against the tower's twisted games. River looked at him and asked if he had a plan. Kion promised he'd find a way for them not just to survive, but to actually conquer this tower. They were going to climb higher and higher, all the way to the top. With a look of pure hope, our hero gazed upward, actually believing they could all get their old lives back someday. His speech lit a fire under everyone, sparking a real desire to win and fight for their own happiness. Jane chimed in, telling them all they needed to stick together to pull this off. Even Liam felt fired up, finally getting that a person's level doesn't mean a thing when it comes to what they're truly worth. And then, right on cue, their manager popped up again out of thin air. The sneaky little guy was back, and of course, he was there to announce another challenge. Let's be real, this was supposed to be a death game, not a company retreat. So when he suddenly reappeared, it kicked off a flurry of questions, like, what brings you back? And more importantly, you got any spare stat points for us? Kion, however, being the sharp guy he is, already had a feeling he knew what this test was about. The next mission for the second floor was set to happen right here with the 16 of us who were left. The charming title they gave it was Royal Battle. Kungum flashed a smile, reassuring us that since we were all low level, this little test wouldn't be too rough. By that point, though, not a single person trusted a word out of that rabbit's mouth. The setup was that each of the 16 players would go up against their own personal clone. That meant 32 people crammed into one room. Our job was to get rid of our lookalikes. The only problem was, these copies didn't just have our stats, they had all our memories too, which made things way more awkward and intense. But the absolute cruelest part of the whole deal was that taking out your own clone got you absolutely nothing. You only scored gold and stat points if you eliminated another actual player. In short, the tower was encouraging us to off each other for the rewards, and if a full 30 minutes went by without anyone biting the dust, every player would get teleported to the lobby to face some kind of horrible disaster. With no warning at all, a portal just ripped itself open in the middle of the hall, and then something enormous started to ooze its way out. A wave of pure panic washed over everyone as they scrambled away from the giant, inhuman hand that emerged. What came out of that portal was a monster of some unknown level that was about as tall as a skyscraper. Just getting one look at it was enough to make you want to dive under a blanket and hope really, really hard that it was all just a bad dream. Was the tower actually expecting our little crew to fight times that times thing? A massive shockwave exploded through the hall, tearing everything apart and flinging people around like they were rag dolls. Kion tackled Jane and Liam, pulling them to the ground just as a shower of debris rained down. That gigantic beast was definitely the disaster they'd been talking about. The players figured something big was coming, but not this big, and certainly not on the second floor. That's when the real chaos started. Full-blown hysteria took over the room. Everyone was just frozen in shock. It was the perfect moment for a hero to step up and take charge. Using his super high agility, Kion zipped forward and snatched a kid, who was paralyzed with fear, right in the monster's path. The mission hadn't even officially kicked off, and it already felt like the apocalypse had arrived. All the while, Kungum was over there laughing like a maniac, just soaking it all in. Kion remembered what the rabbit had said about a disaster, and a little light bulb went on in his head. What if this was all just a big show? The monster, the destruction. Maybe it was all just a hologram that couldn't actually hurt them. The folks who weren't having a complete meltdown charged in to fight, hacking away at the beast with everything they had. It was completely useless, though. The creature didn't even seem to notice. Watching them, even Kion started to have his doubts. Was this really just for show? Jane, their healer, was almost completely out of mana, and that felt pretty real. Nobody had been seriously hurt yet, but it was clear that wouldn't last. The monster started to charge up another one of its devastating attacks, ready to flatten them all. Kion yelled for everyone to fall back and get clear of the shockwave. He, on the other hand, stayed right where he was. Liam tried to drag him back, but the hero was dead set on this. He was convinced he was the only one who could take this thing down. He figured if he mixed his piercing strike with the indomitable blade, he might just have a shot. A bright light flared up around his sword, just as the monster's gigantic fist came crashing down. This was either going to be the coolest thing he'd ever done, or he was about to become a pancake. There was no in-between. A brilliant flash lit up the entire hall. When the light died down, Kion was still on his feet. His attack had punched a huge, empty hole straight through the monster's arm, and then, weirdly, the massive beast just started to pixelate and fade away, like it was never even there. The tension in the room snapped, and everyone started cheering like crazy. Even Kion hadn't realized his blade was packing that much of a punch, but he could tell something inside him felt off. He pulled up his guide and was not prepared for the notification. He had officially overdone it. His body was completely drained. He was facing 3 minutes of being totally powerless. His strength just up and left him. He crumpled to the ground as the world got fuzzy and then went completely dark. A system notification chimed, strength restored. It felt like a shot of pure caffeine straight to the heart for Kion. Other players started to gather around him, but he just had this 1,000-yard stare, his brain still trying to process what in the world had just happened. Liam, who was standing right next to him, was just completely blown away. No one could believe the kid had been hiding that kind of power. Kion, however, tuned out all the chatter and the stares. All he cared about was getting to the bottom of this so-called disaster. And that's when the tower's cheerful manager revealed the big secret himself. The whole thing had just been for show. The monster was sent back to wherever it came from. With a teasing little laugh, the rabbit talked about how close they'd all come to being wiped out, complimenting the wonderfully tense atmosphere it created. All the players slowly turned to stare at him, some with fear, and others with a look that clearly said, "I am going to murder you." And then he dropped the little reminder. Every 30 minutes, someone had to die. With the most innocent look on his face, he delivered the nastiest news. It hit them all at once. The killer could be standing right next to them. Suddenly, everyone started giving each other the side eye, and the friendly neighborhood vibe just vanished. Seriously, did nobody see this was just another classic move to make them turn on each other? With his little bombshell dropped, the floor manager, just pieced out through his portal. Everyone just gawked at the empty space, totally clueless about what fresh heck was coming. Back in the lobby, all heck broke loose. Everyone was shouting out ideas on how to spot the fakes, but the whole thing was looking like a total nightmare. The problem was, these doppelgangers didn't just look the part, they had all the memories, too. Just when the chaos hit peak levels, Kion stepped up and shut everyone down, claiming he had it all figured out. His grand plan, he was going to handle this whole thing solo. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone just stared, their faces screaming, "Are you kidding me?" Then Kion told them all to hoof it to the highest spot on the map. The rule was simple. If you wander off, you're a clone, and you're fair game. Not exactly a crowd pleaser. Dean, the level 8 soldier dude, looked particularly grumpy about it. Kion was like, "Guys, remember what the rabbit said? This isn't really a fight the clones mission. The tower just wants us to go all Hunger Games on each other." He announced he wasn't playing that twisted game and laid out what he thought was their only shot at winning. A few people were still grumbling, but River the Archer backed him up. Still, he had to ask, "So, if you're going out there by yourself, does that mean you can actually tell who's who?" Kion's reply was short and sweet, "Yep." And right on cue, the system dinged. The second floor mission was officially on. The objective, kill within 30 minutes or everybody gets wiped. Meanwhile, Leo was stomping along, muttering to himself about how he doesn't take orders from anyone. A real team player, that one. He heard a twig snap and immediately dove behind a tree, his heart pounding. Was it a clone? Nope, just Kion, grinning like a goofball. The guy was just messing with him. How a dude that big managed to hide behind a sapling was, honestly, the real mystery here. Leo let out a huge sigh of relief, seeing his actual buddy was way better than running into some creepy knockoff. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, our hero just casually sliced a guy in two, his sword going through him like a hot knife through butter. Kion held his sword, looking totally unfazed, and ended the poor sap's life in a flash. His face was pure, cold business. But let's rewind a bit. Turns out, Kion had prepped for this mission with a level of paranoia that was borderline impressive. He was sure he could spot the fakes, but he was still worried about screw-ups. So, Kion dumped a small fortune's worth of gold into maxing out his perception stats. This made him the very first player to unlock absolute sense, basically cranking his awareness up to 11. All 5 of his senses were tuned to 100% perfection. He could pretty much detect anything and anyone in a huge area around him. He just had to concentrate for a second, and he could hear some quiet mumbling from a voice he knew. A quick scan with his supervision, and bam, he found him. It was Leo's outline. Even though the guy was half a kilometer away, it was like the red-headed warrior was standing right next to him. Then came the smell. And yeah, his nose was just as overpowered. This absolutely disgusting odor hit him, almost making his eyes water. Kion followed the funk and realized it was coming from the red-headed warrior's nasty clone. So even though the fake Leo put on a perfect act, our boy Kion had his number from the get-go. Kion glanced back towards the peak where the real players were supposed to be camping out, just hoping his huddle-up strategy was working. On paper, as long as they all stayed put, they should have been fine. Then, of course, the system announced a real player had just been offed. Kion definitely didn't see that coming, at least not this early. A wave of panic hit him. Who did it? A real player, or one of the clones. The hero couldn't wrap his head around it, but while he was busy fighting another fake, a second player bit the dust. His super senses picked up something awful. He saw one player taking down another. Except to Kion, the attacker looked less like a person and more like a sneaky doppelganger. He didn't even think twice. He just launched himself into the fray. For a split second, you could have sworn it was just a regular person. But Kion didn't hesitate. He mercilessly chopped that clone right in half. For a hot second, he thought it might have been his clone. But nope, it was someone else's. Good thing he noticed when he did. Poor Luke, a level 4 player, was gone. It was a messy, pointless death. As Kion checked out the body, he spotted something that was totally out of place. The clone of that guy, Den, was using a big old ancient sword. But the gash across the dead guy's face wasn't from a sword. It was made by something way smaller and sharper, like an arrowhead. One of River's arrows, to be exact. And another one was pointed straight at our hero from behind a tree. So far away, Kion couldn't tell if it was the real River or his copy. But then he noticed something else. There was an arrow sticking out of River's own back. Did a clone get him, or did he do that to himself? Our guy stepped out from behind his cover and yelled, asking if the archer was okay. River, not taking any chances, kept his distance. He couldn't tell friend from foe. Kion's reply was pretty blunt. I just killed a clone, he said. Is that good enough for you? You could see the doubt just wash away from the archer's face, replaced by a flash of relief. But just as he was about to warn Kion to watch out for his own doppelganger, a pained scream ripped out of his mouth. River just collapsed, totally unresponsive, and the hero immediately dove to his side, trying to haul him to safety when they ran right into Jane, the healer. Hold on, what was she even doing here? She was supposed to be in a secure spot. It was then that Kion's ridiculously sharp senses picked up on something River missed. These two were fakes, total doppelgangers. At a quick glance, it just looked like Jane and Liam hanging out together. But Kion saw through their flimsy disguises in a heartbeat. The moment he did, the two imposters lunged, launching an attack on both Kion and the injured archer. Liam's copycat sword met Kion's, and the difference was night and day. Kion moved with total conviction, while this knockoff was running on pure, unadulterated smugness. Jane, on the other hand, made a beeline for River, who was barely conscious. Kion couldn't help but wonder why they'd blow their cover so carelessly. Other fakes had kept up the act until the very last second. And Jane, of all people, knew how powerful Kion was, so why was she charging into a guaranteed beatdown? He spun around just in time to see the blonde coming at him with a sword, while at the exact same moment, Liam swung from his other flank. But wait, where was River? The one with the bow and arrows. Pure instinct saved him. Kion dodged, leaping backward just as things got dicey. And in that split second, it all clicked. An arrow slammed into the tree right next to him, close enough to graze his cheek. That shot had been for him the whole time. Off to the side, a burst of mocking laughter rang out, and the sound made Kion's blood run cold. River was grinning a completely twisted, psychotic smile as he aimed another arrow square at Kion's face. Well, now everything was crystal clear. So that's why the doubles dropped their axe so fast and why the fight kicked off without any warning. They knew they had the upper hand. The archer wasn't a fake. He was the genuine article, a full-blown lunatic who was itching to see the hero bleed. He was a master manipulator, the kind who could fool everyone without leaving a single shred of doubt. And what did he get out of it? The chance to murder someone and get a thrill from the bloodshed. Kion couldn't even begin to process the emotions swirling inside him. A betrayal like this, especially right now, was something he never could have seen coming. What was he feeling? Disappointment, a sense of being stabbed in the back, and just plain sorrow. The psycho didn't have to pretend anymore. He was openly taunting the hero, just soaking in his misery. Kion had always wondered when River would show a different side, something beyond the noble leader persona he put on. The reality, though, was so much worse. The guy was completely unhinged. Honestly, who expects to get a knife plunged straight into their back from a teammate? Kion's eyes scanned River's stats, and they had skyrocketed into god-tier territory. The archer was finally showing his true colors to the world. He wasn't just looking at Kion as some lucky guy anymore. He saw him as a chosen one, someone with an actual divine blessing. Kion kept asking himself, over and over, what was the point of all this? Weren't money and prestige enough? Was that really so unsatisfying that he had to start killing off his own teammates? The truth was even uglier. For River, this tower was his own private playground, a place where you could kill without any consequences. In fact, you were celebrated for it. Even then, a part of the hero was trying to make excuses for the kid who had protected him once before. But it was pointless. The fight was on a brutal, merciless 3-against-1 showdown. Who was going to walk away from this? The doubles fought like machines, with no remorse or hint of humanity. They had one single goal, kill. But the hero had his own advantage. His will to live was stronger. Kion was faster and more powerful, but he was all by himself. River's arrows weren't your standard issue projectiles. They were seriously buffed up, punching straight through solid tree trunks, which meant he was still holding back his real power. You had the deadliest swordsman, the only healer, and an archer whose shots were lethal from the second the fight began. This team-up gave him practically zero chance, not just of winning, but of even making it out alive. Kion had no idea how River, an actual player, had talked two system-generated doubles into joining his side. The archer probably figured his duel with the hero would be over in a flash, but Kion was a lot tougher than he looked. For a psychopath, that was just a bonus. A longer fight meant more blood and more suffering. The three of them attacked the hero all at once. Kion didn't even bat an eye. He just switched on his absolute sense. He could feel every single movement, every breath, every twitch of an eye. There was no question those two clones had some impressive stats. Each one had clearly maxed out their most critical skills. They weren't idiots. But whichever way you sliced it, Kion was just on another level. His stats were literally double theirs. And to top it all off, his sensory perception was cranked up to the absolute max. Neither Liam's fancy swordplay nor Jane's healing tricks were going to save them from what was coming. And now, Kion was finally standing face to face with the real psycho killer, River. After getting a front row seat to the hero's true power, River's cocky attitude shattered. He actually started to tremble. The archer fell to his knees, his face a mask of pure desperation. Kion, however, just looked back at him with an ice-cold, unbreakable confidence. River started whimpering and begging for his life, groveling and doing anything he could to survive. He started spewing excuses, saying he only freaked out when he saw what the hero could do. But the truth was obvious. River had gone completely off the deep end. He pleaded for one last chance, swearing he could prove he was a good person, but it was all just a ploy to buy time. His hand was already inching toward his quiver for another arrow. He never even got the chance to draw it. Kion didn't even hesitate before landing the final blow. Yeah, this particular hero was definitely not your average target. The guy moved like he was Bruce Lee in his prime. At this point, only 13 players and 11 of their lookalikes were still standing. Kion had a whole plan worked out, but things went sideways, and he had to take out a real person. Right after, a system notification popped up. This one was different, though, glowing an ominous crimson. By taking down another player, he just unlocked the path of flesh. If he accepted, he'd get some sweet bonus stats and even help from the doppelgangers. Following this path meant fully embracing the role of a killer to gain some seriously insane power. A swirling red vortex materialized in front of him, giving off some seriously bad vibes. A figure started to take shape inside it, a woman completely shrouded in shadows and shifting light. She looked like trouble personified. Her job was basically to tempt Kion over to the dark side. It all clicked for Kion in that moment, and a look of shock spread across his face. So this times was River's secret for getting the clones on his team. Taking the killer's path came with some crazy good perks, like new armor, skills, stat boosts, and even fresh talents. Kion had felt a little weird about offering copies of people he knew, but at the end of the day, they were just clones. From this point on, however, he was going to be up against actual players who had willingly chosen that life of bloodshed. Right there in front of him was an opportunity. A shortcut straight to the top of the food chain if he just said yes. But even with all that power dangled in front of him, he decided to stick to the high road. No need for pointless killing. He refused to become a blood-crazed maniac like River. He finally made it to the rendezvous point, where Jane, Leo, and Liam were all waiting for him. But Leo was acting super strange, which was completely out of character for him. For a split second, Kion wondered if the redhead was finally cracking under the pressure. He got everyone together anyway and thanked them for actually showing up and hearing him out. The group's big question was whether he could genuinely tell the real players from the fakes, but right as he was about to explain, something else grabbed everyone's attention. Standing right behind him was another Kion. Identical face, identical voice, but his outfit was completely pristine. Not a drop of blood on it. Everyone just froze. The air was thick with suspicion. Which one was the real deal? Who were they supposed to trust? It felt like he was looking at his own reflection. Kion realized the choice wasn't up to him anymore, it was up to them. This was the exact scenario he'd wanted to prevent by finding his clone earlier, but River's little rampage had already sent the whole game completely off the rails. Kion faced off against his double. The show was officially on the road. It was truth against lies, and the other players were starting to panic. Kion had promised he'd take care of the clones himself, but in that moment, who were they supposed to take at their word? They started demanding proof. Which of the doubles had he already eliminated? Why weren't those people around anymore? By then, there were only 8 players left whose clones were either confirmed dead or just plain missing. If Kion just listed the names of the clones he'd taken out, everyone would know who the remaining fakes were. It would prove he was telling the truth. But here was the kicker. His copy knew the exact same information. Both Kions listed the same names, until it got to Jane and Leo. The rest of the players were stunned silent, trying to wrap their heads around this wild turn of events. And that's when the clone Kion stepped up to put on a show. He was loud, self-assured, and a seriously smooth talker. He brought up Jane and Leo, reminding everyone how he'd been their buddy since the very first mission, sticking with them through everything. He put it all out there on the table. He explained why it made sense that those two would be the first ones he'd have to eliminate, not just some random players. A seed of doubt started to grow in the group. The clone's logic was just plausible enough to be dangerous. He pushed his advantage, twisting the narrative to suggest that if Kion's story held any water, then it must have been Kion himself who killed River. The clone described River as some kind of paragon of virtue, a noble leader who was always there for his team and pushed them to stick together. He played on the idea that a guy like that couldn't have been defeated so easily. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Could they put their faith in someone who had actually killed another player? It felt like the clone was just one move away from winning this psychological chess match. He pointed an accusing finger at Kion with a smug grin, playing the part of the righteous judge. The second the others processed that their leader was really gone, they were ready to pounce on Kion without a second thought. But Leo jumped in and broke the tension, reminding them all that if Kion could be a clone, then Leo himself could be one too. The clock was ticking down to total chaos. They had to do something, and they had to do it now. Kion stepped up and owned it. He was the one who did the deed. But his confession came with a bombshell nobody saw coming. River had been a complete psychopath hiding behind a friendly smile. Taking him out wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a necessity. As he said it, Kion moved like a blur, striking the archer with surgical precision and giving him zero chance to even react. For a brief moment, the clone was completely convinced the attack was meant for him and just stood there, frozen like a deer in headlights. Liam then pointed out a pretty major flaw in the clone's story. If Kion was really a heartless murderer, gathering everyone in one place would have been the perfect setup for a massacre. Looked at that way, the clone's whole argument suddenly started to sound a lot less convincing. If a clone actually tried to kill a real player, their cover would be blown immediately, and that was a gamble no imposter in their right mind would ever take. Then again, if Kion really could tell them apart, taking out a clone would be all the proof they needed that he was the real deal. The team was still having a hard time wrapping their heads around it. Could good old, dependable River seriously have been a murderer this entire time? Sen's answer was quick and certain. Yep. River just put on a nice guy act to cover up what a monster he truly was. Mary, the girl with the short hair, wasn't having any of it. To her, River was the guy who had swooped in and saved her during that very first mission. Who did this guy think he was? Trying to tarnish his good name. With fury blazing in her eyes, she charged straight at Kion. But halfway through her attack, her face went blank. A scream caught in her throat as an arrow suddenly stuck out of her back. An arrow that could only have come from one person. It was River himself, and his shot was perfectly aimed. Mary collapsed, never to speak again. Nobody could deny what Kion had said now. River's friendly facade had completely crumbled, leaving just 12 players and 11 clones standing. The clone of the archer who just died dropped the act, revealing a bloodthirsty psycho underneath. But he didn't get to enjoy it for long. A deadly blow from behind pierced right through him, and the copy vanished in a flash. Dean, a level 8 soldier class player, emerged from the shadows, apologizing to Kion for ever questioning him. Finally, everything made sense. The players could now easily tell who was real and who was a fake. With no more hesitation, they all agreed to follow their one true leader, Kion. A bunch of weird feelings started bubbling up inside him, emotions he'd never really experienced before. Even with all the tension, he started to explain his plan for what to do next. His own clone, figuring the jig was up, dropped all pretenses and went in for a surprise attack. It was the ultimate irony. How could Kion possibly beat himself? They had the exact same skills and power levels. This was going to be a battle of wits, plain and simple. Everyone else had to sink every last gold coin they had into buffing their stats, making sure they were stronger than their duplicates. If they pulled it off, the clones stood zero chance. When the quest was finally over, the ones who made it back gathered in the grand vestibule. The body count had been high, and a heavy sadness filled the room. If it hadn't been for River's betrayal, maybe a few more of them would still be here. No one took it harder than Dean, who used to fight right alongside the archer. Kion felt a pang of regret, too. He really hadn't wanted to see any of his allies end up in a grave. He could only imagine how much worse things were in the other towers. Not everyone would get to face challenges the way he did. Some would probably just go full-on psycho killer. Every fight from here on out was going to be tougher, messier, and way more brutal. Still, there had to be a reason he was the one who got this crazy rare ability, this long-shot opportunity. After all, there were still people counting on him. Kion made a promise to himself to do whatever it took to keep them safe. And honestly, even though his level was low, Kion had pulled way more than his own weight. It almost felt like fate had slipped some kind of secret advantage into his pocket. Kion made a mental note of the man's careful nature and smart thinking. He could be a real cornerstone in the fights ahead. Dean came right out and asked for forgiveness for not believing him and for underestimating his power. Then, one after another, the rest of the group chimed in with their own apologies. From the other side of the room, Leo shouted in his typically smug tone that they should have just been riding Kion's coattails from the get-go, just like he had. Dean then announced to everyone that he wanted Kion to keep leading them, all the way to the top. The kid hadn't been expecting to win them over so completely, but he felt touched, a little humbled, and secretly pretty proud. It was time to split the gold, with each person's share based on what they'd accomplished during the mission. To their astonishment, every single survivor got a cut, even though Kion was the only one who had actually killed another person. The red-headed warrior made a big show of his hard-won earnings, flashing his coins around with a fiery grin. And so, by sticking with Kion, the players got to cash in on surviving. The hero of the day got a massive bonus himself, 12,500 gold pieces deposited straight into his account. It quickly became obvious that if you wanted to get your hands on rare items, you had to level up the shop itself first. Kion started to carefully mull over his options, trying to figure out what would give him the biggest edge in the upcoming battles. He dropped 5,000 gold on a mastery upgrade, which fine-tuned his swordsmanship and, more importantly, pushed him up to level 3. Before, he'd only managed to pull off a certain technique by pure luck. Now, he could use it whenever he wanted, no strings attached. With his shopping done, Kion glanced over at the rest of the group. He sent 1,200 gold over to Jane, whose jaw practically hit the floor at the generous gift. His logic was pretty straightforward. She'd been right there with him through the fights with the kobolds and doppelgangers, always ready to back him up. In a world where you could be dead tomorrow, sharing a laugh and trusting your teammates was worth more than any amount of gold. Helping out and smiling with the people who had your back, that was the only real way to move forward. And for that, Jane's healing skills and kind personality were absolutely invaluable. His act of kindness lit a fire in her, and she immediately used the funds to power up, hitting level 2. He also tossed 200 gold Leo's way, hoping it might persuade the guy to dial back the wild antics. Kion saw some real promise in him. If he could just be molded a bit, he could turn into someone useful. Turns out, a little cash was all it took. The red-haired troublemaker swore up and down that he'd follow every single one of Kion's commands. Before long, a system notification popped up with their next assignment. It looked like it was time to put Kion's new level 3 skills to the test. The third-floor trial kicked off at the foot of a massive fortress simply called the Siege. The system message explained that, for the very first time, they'd be running into players from other districts. Their objective was pretty straightforward. They had a single day to take over both the castle and its altar. As for the penalty, if they failed, the system was being suspiciously quiet on that front. Suddenly, a temporary item materialized in each of their hands, the reversal stone, a little trinket you could only get on this floor. Once again, the group just shook their heads, amazed at the weird curveballs these missions always threw at them. The moment Kion read the new info, he knew exactly what the first move had to be, and he fondly recalled Leo's very recent, very enthusiastic vow of obedience. True to his word, the red-haired follower headed out on a solo scouting run, doing exactly as his new boss commanded. Now, some might call it a little cruel to send your newly loyal buddy off to what looked like certain death right after he put his trust in you. But hey, survival, or at least, not staying dead was pretty much guaranteed. The guide had mentioned that this neat little stone would just teleport its owner back to the start if they got taken out. Of course, Leo wasn't doing this out of the goodness of his heart. Kion promised him another 100 gold if he successfully pulled off his mission. As they neared the entrance, it was time for the red-haired warrior to earn his keep. He basically just launched himself at the giant doors, hammering away at them with everything he had. With every single smash, the gate's durability dropped and cracked spiderweb across it until, finally, he shattered the whole thing to pieces. The opening only lasted for a blink, and you'll miss it 2 seconds before the doors started putting themselves back together. On top of that, there were archers standing guard above, but strangely enough, they hadn't fired a single arrow while Leo was making all that racket. Down at the base of the altar were nearly 10 figures, with one more perched on top who was probably the leader. Kion was mentally screaming, "Don't do anything stupid," because that would give away the whole secret of the reversal stone. But Leo wasn't exactly famous for his caution. The instant he charged forward, a projectile that looked an awful lot like a bullet came flying at him, looking creepily similar to the very stone he was carrying. It nailed him square in the face. The hit looked absolutely brutal, almost certainly fatal. Clutching his face, the redhead dropped to his knees, writhing in what looked like some serious agony. His mind just couldn't process what in the world had just happened. As his vision started to blur and he felt the stone begin to yank him back, he caught a glimpse of something. Was that a gun in her hands? Kion could hardly believe what he was seeing. That was a real-deal firearm. Leo, once he respawned, swore on his life that's what it was. But a weapon like that should have been impossible at this stage. I mean, even Dean, a level 9 soldier, was still just swinging swords around. It could only mean one thing. Someone in that other group had picked the assassin class, and that revelation suddenly made a lot of things make sense. After all, Kion himself had once been offered a special legendary weapon that other players couldn't get. This fight was going to be absolutely merciless, no doubt about it. Seeing her leader hesitate for a moment, Jane stepped up with some words of encouragement and her usual steady, warm presence. The others immediately chimed in, declaring they were ready to fight right beside him and clear this trial together. Their faith totally reignited Kion's spirit. Together, they were ready to make their move. Still, an ominous silence hung within the castle walls, a creepy feeling that some real horrors were waiting for them. With his resolve burning bright again, Kion led his group into the assault, armed with a little treasure he had picked up back on the second floor. Using his heightened senses, he pinpointed the 2 archers that Leo had mentioned. The red-haired fighters started taunting them, figuring that if they didn't shoot at him before, they probably wouldn't bother to do it now. He could have just explained the whole respawn stone thing, but Kion figured it would be way more effective to let the enemy think he had some kind of insane regeneration power. And just as he'd hoped, this time, the archers let a whole volley of arrows fly, leaving absolutely no room to escape. But our hero was on a whole other level, reacting far faster than anyone else could have. The arrows were heading straight for Leo, aimed with deadly, pinpoint accuracy, but Kion sliced them right out of the air, the shafts shattering into splinters long before they could even get close to the redhead. Using Leo's shoulder like a springboard, the young fighter launched himself with explosive force, soaring straight up to where the archers were perched, ready to end the threat immediately. With a calm, focused expression, our hero took them down. They were completely blindsided by his overwhelming power. The rest of the group knew that was their cue to go all out. It was the only way to keep the enemy from figuring out the true power of the reversal stone. With the threat from above gone, the others charged the entrance gates. Leo took it upon himself to bust them down again. He called on Stone Fist, level 2, a technique that was way beyond his current limits. Jane rushed over to heal him from the skill's backlash, but even with the strain, the red-haired warrior managed to completely obliterate the gates in one massive hit, leaving nothing behind to regenerate. From his spot up high, Kion overheard one of the archers grumble that his whole let's be nice strategy was totally pointless. Down below, the scene was exactly what Leo had described. A bunch of players huddled together and a woman in front of them, holding a pistol like she was the boss. Just from the vibe, you could tell she wasn't a leader. Nope, she was a full-blown tyrant. She had this ice-cold glare that screamed, "I have no soul." Kion pulled up his guide, and there she was, a level 13 assassin with a level 3 sniper skill. Yikes. To get this far up, she must have caused an absolute train wreck on the second floor. She didn't even think about it, just lifted her gun and shot straight at Kion. Our hero, completely caught off guard, didn't move fast enough. A bullet ripped right through his chest. While chugging a healing potion, he had to admit he'd messed up. He totally underestimated her. Good thing he'd done some shopping earlier and bought some leather armor that was basically a magic-proof bullet vest. Kion figured that with a fancy gun like that, she probably hadn't found an item to refill her mana yet. Every shot drained 10 of her mana points, which meant she had about 13 bullets left in the tank. The other team charged forward, thinking only about winning. But Kion's crew was scarily fast and ridiculously strong. Then again, what good is being fast when you're running straight into a hail of bullets? Getting to the altar seemed impossible with instant death waiting at the front door. But hey, our guys had seen this coming and had also stocked up on some snazzy enchanted clothes. The enemy group was just standing around, waiting for their leader to tell them what to do, while she was doing all the fighting herself. The bullets weren't one-shot kills, but man, they drained your mana like crazy. Jane, the team's only healer, was hanging back, patching everyone up and giving them little strength boosts. When Kayla noticed that Kion's team was actually getting stronger, she finally told her own people to get in there and fight. With things getting hairy, our heroes knew they had to get to that altar, and fast. They probably would have let the other players slide, but everyone was too scared of what Kayla would do to them. Our main guy was taking on several enemies at the same time, not giving a single one of them a shot at winning. That's when the tyrant lady, realizing he was pretty tough, aimed a bullet right for his head. But he didn't die. Liam jumped in and smacked the bullet away with his sword at the last second. The assassin was clearly not happy that the swordsman ruined her perfect shot. So, without missing a beat, she just took him out of the game so he couldn't get in her way again. Jane was having a hard time keeping up with the constant stream of injured teammates running back to her. Kayla's aim was sharp and she showed no mercy. With every shot she fired, more and more players were dropping. Even though they'd all respawn, the whole thing felt way too real. How could someone just kill people with such a blank, empty look on their face? Maybe she was even enjoying it, kind of like how River used to get a kick out of a good fight. That's when our hero decided to go all out with his level 3 beginner swordsman skills. He moved like a blur, taking down every enemy stupid enough to stay close to him. Finally, it was just him and the crazy assassin. Kion's incredible power was about to go head-to-head with a level 13 assassin. This was going to be a messy fight, so who was going to win? While our hero was busy fighting for the altar, Leo was off doing his own thing, planning to take care of the other players his own way. Kayla's jaw pretty much hit the floor when she saw how strong Kion was, especially since he was only a level 3. He just shot back a snarky comment, pointing out that her own level 13 wasn't exactly earned fair and square. The altar had 3 spots on it, and to capture it, 3 players had to be standing on them at the same time. Our hero hopped onto one of the spots, which started the capture timer. To finish the 3rd floor challenge, he just needed 2 more friends to stand on the other spots. But first things first, he had to deal with the psycho standing in front of him. With some seriously impressive moves, Kion dodged a bullet that was aimed right for his heart. In the blink of an eye, he launched a counterattack, moving so fast Kayla never saw it coming. She couldn't believe some low-level nobody was keeping up with her. It was just insane. Our hero decided it was time to land the final blow and end this whole nightmare. But Kayla wasn't about to let that happen. With her boosted stats, she jumped back from Kion's sword in a flash. While she was still in the air, she fired off a few more shots at him, but every single one missed. It was insane. The bullets flew right past without so much as nicking him. He didn't even flinch, just stood there as if he knew exactly where each shot would land. Seriously, who teaches someone to read attacks like that? Sure, Liam was easily one of the most skilled swordsmen in the area, but it's kind of hilarious that before he got into this whole tower climbing gig, he was a national-level ping-pong prodigy. In a sport where every point is decided in a split second, keeping your eye on that crazy fastball is no easy task. On top of that, Liam's old title used to be the Genius of Foresight, and it was all thanks to him that Kion learned the skills he needed to get through this insane fight. Our hero then dashed forward at incredible speed, heading straight for Kayla. His attack was a big one, but it wasn't quite enough to finish the job. That hit was no joke. With just one swing, he completely demolished a concrete pillar next to them. While reloading, it dawned on Kayla that just having a big gun and being strong wasn't going to be enough to win this. Meanwhile, our 3 heroes had wiped the floor with every enemy in sight, and were about to call it a day before the respawn timer kicked in. And hearing that, the woman suddenly got it. She finally understood the real point of the reverse stone. At this point, though, he couldn't care less. He was confident he could handle any last-minute trick she tried to pull. The hero decided to just let her make a move first, planning to finish her off right after. Turns out, she wasn't about to do something reckless. Kayla might have been off her rocker, but she was no idiot. She promptly leveled up her sniper skill to 4. Just like he'd predicted, our hero let the assassin make her move. But could he actually counter her and finish the mission? That was the big question. A system notification blared out, 3rd floor mission complete. Somehow, their team had managed to pull off a win. So, how'd they do it? Down at the altar, neither of them saw it coming. The hero was blindsided when Kayla actually fired, and she had no clue he was about to stick his blade right through her heart. And the very last thing she uttered before disappearing into thin air? It was just the hero's name. With her out of the picture, the trio stepped up to the altar and officially claimed their victory. All of a sudden, a strange, two-sided mirror shimmered into existence in the middle of the grand hall, showing a perfect view of another team's area. Turns out, this victory came with a seriously nasty string attached. A total disaster emerged from the mirror, a massive, ridiculously powerful monster. It immediately started hunting down any player who hadn't managed to get a single kill on the third floor. The room instantly erupted in panic. All you could hear were screams and people begging for their lives as the whole situation turned into an absolute bloodbath. Jane, who had a heart of gold, desperately wanted to help them out. But the second she touched the mirror's surface, it zapped her with a nasty jolt of electricity. That creature was absolutely ruthless, leaving nothing but torn apart bodies scattered everywhere. The players could only watch in horror at the nightmarish scene playing out right in front of them, a sight that chilled them to the bone. The very last player was brutally stomped under the monster's foot, leaving nothing behind but a red splatter on the floor. Once the slaughter was over, a voice on the intercom announced that only a single player was left alive and that the groups would now be reformed. Kion felt a chill run down his spine. The lone survivor was, of all people, that complete psychopath, Kayla. And by the look on her face, she wasn't exactly ecstatic about it either. Our hero, on the other hand, was so blindingly angry he could hardly think. The fourth floor mission dropped them right into the rubble of a destroyed city, and a message appeared for all the players. In 6 hours, a disaster was set to level the entire city. To make it out alive, their job was to hunt monsters. Doing this would cause portals to pop up in random spots, which were the only way to escape. All in all, 20 portals were going to show up. The portals couldn't be handed over to anyone else, and they only had 6 hours on the clock. Most of the players were actually thrilled by this setup. It meant no player versus player fighting, just taking on monsters. But there was still a major restriction. Portals were strictly one per person. This meant if someone managed to open more than one, other people would be stranded. With only 20 portals available, wait a minute. Wasn't this whole thing basically a trap set up by the tower? The players all came to an agreement. The moment a portal opened up for you, you had to get out immediately. They finally understood the true nature of this mission. Our heroes were finally working together like a well-oiled machine. There was just one new, completely unexpected problem. Her name was Kayla. She wasn't part of their crew and had zero interest in their little pact. Completely ignoring the rest of the group, she just marched off to handle the mission by herself. And just like that, the player's next ordeal had begun. Going back to the moment she first appeared in the hall, the woman wasted no time in letting everyone know exactly what she was about and that traveling with her was going to be an absolute nightmare. She started causing problems from the moment she got there. For starters, she just beat Leo to a pulp. Kion, however, told everyone to calm down, reminding them she was the new kid on the block and that he handled assassins before. Suddenly, our hero felt a sharp, nasty feeling that made him instinctively pull back from her. Right then, a notification from his guide popped into view. Apparently, Kayla had set him as her primary target. And no, not in a let's go get coffee kind of way. The woman glanced over at him, and she could tell from his expression that he knew exactly what was up. She was totally aware that Kion was a high-value target. Over here, you can see Leo expertly slicing through an orc, splitting its gnarly green face right down the middle in a flash. The red-haired fighter actually got a portal to open on his very first shot. Pretty lucky, right? Still, he was itching to hunt some more, so he tried to sneak off without anyone noticing. On his way back, though, he ran smack into Kion, who seemed to have predicted this whole thing and hadn't wandered off too far. The big fella started to break out in a cold sweat, nervously fumbling for an excuse as he faced the kid. Our hero instantly figured out what was going on. The guy had already popped a portal. So, with a good old-fashioned shove, Kion forced him right back into the main hall. So, about that guide notification when the psycho marked Kion as her main target, there was a bit more to it. It said the assassin was planning to go full power with all her stats on something called the Day of Blood. Taking him out on that specific day would net her some kind of huge reward. Kion had to brace himself for what was coming. A massive, ugly brawl was brewing, and he knew a lot of people were going to end up as casualties. Some ugly orc decided to charge him, yelling something nasty and orcish, and trying to turn him into a shish kebab. But naturally, no magic portal decided to show up for him on the first go, which was just his luck compared to Leo. Taking out monsters was definitely the way to go, but it wouldn't mean a thing until the whole crew had their personal gateways open for business. Kion figured he'd take a peek over at Kayla. He had no doubt she was already wading through mountains of monster guts by now. All of a sudden, this absolutely disgusting smell wafted over, making his face twist up. It was the pure, unadulterated stench of death, like a body that had been left out in the sun for a solid month. He remembered the guide mentioning that orcs were generally pretty flimsy. The ones linked to a portal, though, they had a special kind of funk that was on a whole other level. And so, that unfortunate creature, whose biggest sin was its body odor, was dispatched by Kion in just a couple of seconds. As the monster dropped, a shimmering portal started to take shape right behind it. After searching for what felt like ages, Kion had finally tracked the girl down. She was completely floored when, out of nowhere, he fell to his knees right there in front of her. Looking like a man on his last prayer, our hero started begging her, pleading with her to let him stick around for just a bit longer. This was the absolute last thing Kayla saw coming, and it left her a little weirded out. But, naturally, our boy had a trick up his sleeve. His logic was simple. If she wanted to wait for their big, fated showdown, she'd have to let him live for now and maybe even toss her or killing duties his way. After all, it would be a major pain for her if Kion couldn't get his portal open and make it back. The little detail he left out, his was already up and running. Kayla, meanwhile, was doing her best not to show how much pain his little stunt was causing her, impatiently trying to hustle him along. While Kion was slicing through orcs, he was hit with a strange cocktail of guilt and a rush of power. It felt strangely familiar, just like his relationship with Kayla, who was probably having the exact same debate about how to kill him. By the time our hero got there, Kayla had already managed to open up a whopping 5 portals. Okay, that was a pretty big number. If she had 5, Sen had 1, and the rest of the crew snagged 11. That meant there were only 3 left for the taking. And once those last few were snatched up on the 4th floor, it would be just the 2 of them, staring each other down. He figured it was probably a good time to make a graceful exit. Kion decided to put on a big show of freaking out. With only 10 minutes left on the clock before the mission was over, he acted like they were totally running out of time. He yelled that he'd find an exit by himself and took off like a shot. But then, in a move nobody saw coming, Kayla cut him off. Kion felt a spike of annoyance and suspicion. What was her game? Something about this just wasn't right. Had she decided she was done waiting for their epic final battle? Was she about to end him right here? Just then, she rushed him, looking ready to strike. Kion's blade was in his hand in an instant, ready for a fight, but instead of attacking, she just grabbed his hand and quietly admitted she'd lost track of her portals. Hang on, was that a hint of red on her cheeks? So, murder was clearly off the table, but Kion still couldn't make heads or tails of her weird behavior. As it turned out, she and Sen were the final ones to get back to the lobby. Everyone was on the edge of their seats waiting for Kion's return, but let's just say the reception for Kayla was a little more mixed. Leo sprinted over to his so-called brother, arms open wide for a happy reunion hug. In response, our hero immediately planted a solid punch right on his jaw. The hit was powerful enough to send the redhead staggering back a good few yards. You might be wondering what his deal was. Well, it was nothing serious. Kion was just coming down from the mission's adrenaline rush, and Leo's sudden, enthusiastic greeting had simply spooked him. Amazingly, there were actually a couple of people who seemed happy to see Kayla. Jane and Liam even greeted her with big, honest smiles. The prophet guy even proposed they all try to be friends, figuring that even though they got off on the wrong foot, they were all in the same